bangs bigger in Texas. Enjoy full racks of Chili's world-famous baby back ribs, margarita chicken, savory shrimp, beef fajita, smoked jalapeno sausages, mashed potatoes, and corn on the cob. Man, this meal's bigger than Dallas, but it ain't breaking the bank. Chili's has Texas-sized family meals for just $45 to feed your crew of 3 to 6 folks. For your youngins, just add $5 for a kid's meal. Chili's, more life and bigger meals happen here.
As we celebrate this holiday season, we reflect on the hardships of the past 2 years and remain grateful for the family and friends who share our journey and lighten our burdens. The team at Security Title is proud of the work we do to support ourselves and our families, to serve and care for our customers, and to give back to our community. May this season of joy and the new year bring happiness, good health, and prosperity to you and yours. Merry Christmas from all of us at Security Title.
Guam Auto Spot has the best selection in Buick, GMC, Mitsubishi, and used cars like the 2021 Mitsubishi Mirage starting at $127 per paycheck. 0 down. Call 671-478-AUTO to take a test drive or get pre-approved online at GuamAutospot.com.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Right, Jose?
Absolutely.
Yeah. We want to keep reminding everybody who needs a reminder that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. According to the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution, some of my favorite reading. Okay, so that's how we start the show. That's how I start the show. And I go from there to Zemi Ikotny. It's that part of the show where I take a look at the editorial pages of each of our daily newspapers, try to find a hard-hitting editorial there somewhere. Sometimes I'm successful, sometimes not. And if I do, I'll go through it with my blue pencil and mark it up for English usage, correction of grammar, proper use of theory, etc. And if one is better than the other, it will get the coveted blue star if it rises to the level of the Tall Tales very high standards, because the blue star never goes by default. I start out with the Daily News, and here's what the Daily News has to say. Guam DOE must better engage with families and community. The coach, during the halftime of the game, when his team was a few touchdowns behind, gave his boys some really good advice. He said, score more touchdowns. Something that would have never occurred to them without this coach's extremely inspired halftime remarks. Score more touchdowns. Don't let the other side score. Guam DOE must engage with families and community. I'll bet you that the superintendent never thought of that in a million years. No one would ever think of such a thing. The punchline of this editorial is the pandemic has caused most public school students to fall behind where they need to be in academics. It's critical for Guam DOE to take steps to address this learning loss. It's also essential that the school system take steps so that parents aren't left out of the process. Such genius. Wow.
This definitely was not an above-step editorial.
Yeah, right. Okay, so from there we go to the Post. And in Post, we got something we can sink our teeth into. Federal judge was right to ask, what about the other public officials accused of corruption? U.S. District Court Chief Judge Frances Tydenko Gatewood is known to be a straight talker who doesn't hold back her thoughts on her perch at the federal courthouse where she has served for many years. It was during President George W. Bush's term in 2006 when Tydenko Gatewood was installed as a federal judge. Now, here we go again. Was installed as a federal judge on Guam. Do we have to always keep saying on Guam, you know? She hasn't shied from talking, I think I probably want to say she hasn't shied away from talking about controversial public issues since then. Over the years, the federal judge has called out then governors, then cabinet officials, and others who were held to a higher public level of scrutiny, but in most civil cases, questioning the decisions and conduct of those in charge within Gov Guam. And on Tuesday, during the hearing of former Jonia Mayor Jesse Bloss' request to get out of prison months earlier than scheduled, asserting he's experiencing gout pain and heart troubles and is worried about being infected with the virus that causes Wuhan virus while in a federal prison in Texas, the judge brought up that Bloss's conviction was part of what was believed to be a bigger public corruption investigation. But so far, only Bloss has been arrested, convicted, and sent to prison in the public corruption case. Bloss, under his plea deal, was convicted of taking bribes. He was accused of extorting money in exchange for the use of government cluster mailboxes in his village as distribution points for meth dealers. But what the investigations surrounding his case and in another convicted drug killer's case have alluded to was that a broader public corruption investigation was unfolding. It allegedly involved drug case defendants who were told to go see Bloss prior to his arrest and use his connections in the Guam prison and probation system to disregard arrest warrants or let defendants go free. A former Department of Corrections deputy director and son of a sitting senator who at the time had oversight over public safety, this would be the Familia Tetlahi, was named in federal court documents the prosecution filed in Bloss's case. But that official was never charged. The official later the same day.
Is there a problem with naming him?
I guess so. You know, you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Yeah. Tydenko Gatewood called out the federal prosecution for the outcome of Bloss's case. Quote, "You gave him a sweetheart deal," Tydenko Gatewood said. "It appears there's an absence in prosecuting the other co-conspirators. If public corruption is such a high priority of the U.S. Attorney's Office, I'm sorry. I'm only seeing part of it and not all of it. What happened to the other cases?" The prosecution argued Bloss should not be released early because he severely betrayed the public trust. What about the other public officials, Tydenko Gatewood asked. The federal prosecutor who was put on the spot at Tuesday's federal court hearing responded in part by saying, quote, "We prosecute what we can prove." We are not miracle workers, Your Honor. We are not. What a stupid thing to say. We do our best, but when someone is out early after committing such a violation, it sends a message to the people in terms of corruption. Well, not prosecuting people after you drag their names into the court and then not prosecuting them also sends a message to the people in terms of corruption. The then mayor was recorded as having told one of two women who have since been convicted of drug offenses and who were both romantically linked to Bloss as having said, quote, "I slapped you and choked you and threw you around. Shucks happens. I still went out to the court for you and said I didn't want you locked up." Bloss would later add, I'm connected to that courthouse and I can make shucks happen. The drug dealer had also testified in his case that Blas, when he was mayor, had been dating those young chicks who were in jail or jailed for drug crimes. A federal agent had testified Blas sought sexual favors in exchange for letting a woman avoid drug testing as part of her drug case. The Blas case is not just on the shoulders of the federal investigators. What we haven't heard was that the judiciary of Guam, which has jurisdiction over the probation officer, and GovGuam in general, which runs the local detention and prison system, have done a clean house, or what, if any, actions they took to seek the truth and attempt to hold the other public servants who may have been involved accountable. Blas's arrest and conviction should not be the end of the story. It should have been the beginning of efforts to bring the rest, if any, to justice. Okay, so that's the editorial in the Post. Now, the Post ran a story, and I'll read parts of the Post story. The hearing on Tuesday in federal court was to discuss former Jonia Mayor Jesse Blas' plea to get out of prison. The discussion about public corruption, as you were, Francis Tydinko took the discussion to public corruption. The discussion about public corruption stemmed from federal prosecutor Laura Sambataro's argument against the early release of Blas. And a quote from Sambataro, "At the end of the day, those of us who seek public office are held to a higher standard. This is someone who severely betrayed the public trust on the island. It was his conduct when he committed the crime. This is someone who really hurt the citizens of this island, even though it was a sting operation. The victims of his case really are citizens of Guam," the federal prosecutor said during the hearing. Federal investigators in court documents filed by their prosecution in Blas's case alleged that Blas talked about his connections with the local court probation system and prison. Local and federal defendants facing drug charges were not arrested or escaped testing, and in the case of two women facing drug charges, they had affairs with the then mayor, according to allegations discussed in court. And then we kind of pick up some of the rest of the stuff that's in the editorial, and then we talk a little bit about Blas's case of gout and his potential release. So this is a 5-page article that goes into everything you wanted to know about Jesse Blas, including in one recording previously played in Blas's case, the former mayor was heard scolding his former girlfriend, Vicky Lynn Tarragao, a local court drug defendant. And then we have that quote. And then it goes on to say the FBI has testified that at least 6 people, including Terlahi, and in the article they actually named Joey Terlahi, were under investigation, indicating that Blas hit Tarragao and Terlahi dragged her into a residence at a barbecue where she allegedly was held hostage for 3 days. Federal prosecutors have not filed any charges against the other public officials who were investigated. In a separate federal case, drug convict Mark Mayo alerted the FBI to an apparent scheme involving the local adult probation office and Blas. Quote, "I know he was Lovelia's boyfriend. He was dating her and those young chicks. I don't know much of him," Mayo told investigators. "What I do know is who the point of contact was after I was warranted twice. I didn't want to go to jail, so Lovelia Mendoza told me to go see somebody at the court system, but I never went. I think it was the mayor. Lovelia said to go see him, see them at probation, and they would lift my warrant. Mendoza has since pleaded guilty to conspiracy to distribute." Okay, and then there's a little bit more about Blas. So that's the Post article on Blas, upon which their editorial is based. And it's a pretty good article. Now, we take a look at. Oh, I thought I had it here. I thought I had the Daily News article on the same subject, which was pretty brief. I'll have to work on that tomorrow. You got the Daily News, right, Jose? Yeah, let me take a look at that Daily News. I just didn't staple it to the right paper here at this time. Thank you. Yeah, the Daily News says, when asked what he has been doing to take, as you were, this one talks about former Jonia Mayor Jesse Bloss is asked to be released, talking about his health, his self-care, etc. After hearing all the arguments from both counsel, Kydinko Gatewood decided to take the matter under advisement. I want to think about this. If I release this defendant early, etc. So there's nothing at all about what the judge said about the other defendants in the Daily News. Are not a thing. Not word one.
Wonder why.
Now, is that what we've come to expect from media outlets, that they clean things up to help their friends? Is it inadvertence? Is it excusable neglect? Is it laziness? What is it?
It's certainly newsworthy.
Yeah, the Post covered the news pretty well, and well enough so they could base their editorial on it, and it was a pretty good editorial. All right, next item. Let's see, from there we go to the card. And here's what we have on the card for today. I've got Paul Zerzan versus systemic racism. I've got leaven versus opacity. Vocabulary lesson: opacity. If something is opaque, it means you can't see through it. So opacity is the opposite of transparency. Then we've got Torres. This is Ralph Torres, the governor of the CNMI, versus the Committee on Judiciary. And we've got Tall Tales versus Separatists. One that we haven't gotten to that's been on the card for a couple days, Chicago versus Fox. This gets us into Juicy Smollett versus the jury, and Abdullah versus us, and then we've got BLM versus hate crimes. So Paul Zerzan versus systemic racism. Now, the question for today, who can tell me what color the shirt that I'm wearing is? I'll give you a good look at the shirt. It's got that eagle, globe, and anchor on it. You know, you don't need to tell me what color that is, just the color of the shirt. Is it orange, Jose?
Most definitely not.
How do you know it's not orange?
Because you will never wear orange.
I could never wear orange.
You could never wear an orange.
Yeah, so if you think you've seen me wearing an orange shirt,
think again.
Go to an optometrist or an ophthalmologist, because something is absolutely wrong with your eyes. Because I would never, ever wear orange under any circumstance, correct?
Ever.
Yeah. So this was the lesson from Paul Zerzan versus systemic racism. And I like it so much, I'm going to repeat it again. Paul Zerzan says, what you guys call red rice ain't red, it's orange. And this cascade of criticism came storming down on him. That's what we call it. That's our tradition. That's our culture. How dare you tell us? Ooh, see what I mean? Yeah.
See what happens.
See what happens. Yeah. Okay, it's red rice. Put the power back on.
We don't know if we're on the air, but for those who can hear, our electricity just went out.
Yeah. So if you, can you hear me, Another Joe? Another Joe, can you hear me? Yeah, famous Another Joe question. I noticed that we're getting some some lights on the switchboard, Paul. I mean, Jose. No. Just the switchboard's nervous reaction, huh? Kind of like what happens when you cut the head off a chicken.
Luckily, the lights are blinking white and red.
Uh-huh. It's good they're not blinking orange. Okay, well, what do we do? Do we proceed as though we have an international radio? And Sherry Ariarte says no audio on radio. David Dinsman says, I see and hear you, Bob. So he must be on Facebook, right? Is that right, David? You're on Facebook, but not on the radio? Uh-huh.
Yeah, we're on Facebook.
All right. And then Thomas Tenorio Bernardo, Buenas todos, Samzu Familian Bunta. All right. Okay, tadza electricidad pago no lo gifino English na show must go on a day. Yeah, so we're going to keep going on here as though we have the full complement of tailgaters out there listening to us. The ethic of Tall Tales is this: even if there were only one person out there listening, the show must go on. All right, so let's see. I was just talking about the card, and I was just talking about Paul Zerzan and his systemic racism when the bottom fell out of everything. So I was in praise of Paul Zerzan. Paul Zerzan said, you know what you guys have been calling red rice? It ain't red. It's orange. So the truth, the facts, actuality is that it's orange, and maybe we should start calling it orange. And then this thunderstorm of criticism arises. How dare you say that? It's part of our culture. It's our tradition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought about it a little while, and I thought this is a perfect allegory for what's going on nationwide and locally with respect to things like critical race theory, the cancel culture, and all of the other anomalies that we're seeing. You know, that you have to let somebody who swims in a swimming meet at the University of Pennsylvania and beats the girls by 2 laps. But he calls himself a girl, so you have to pretend that he's a girl. And anyone who would stand up and say, no, he's not a girl, he's a guy, would suffer severe consequences. So the narrative is that if a man wants to be a woman, he can. All he has to do is kind of like Dorothy, just click his ruby slipper, the heels of his ruby slippers, and zap, he's a girl. And all of the other fictions that we're supposed to be putting up with in the name of political correctness. And if we have to disregard the truth and facts in order to fit them into the narrative, that's the way it's got to be done. So that was the classic case of Paul Zerzan versus systemic racism.